Okay, we'll just wait for everyone to come back in. Hello again. Let's just wait for everyone else to come back in. Let's see, who are we missing? We're missing Yosef and Sivya. Okay, I guess I'll continue talking. Oh, here we go.
And your camera's off.
My oh, sorry. Oh,
There.
thank you. So again, you're looking at it as if it's very clear what the consequences are and what the cause and effect was, but you have hindsight, you have the big historical perspective to look at that makes it easy to see. Let me just share the screen, go back to the text. Where is it? Sorry, just 1 second. There we go. Okay. So yeah. So, but if you're living at the time, and it would be like, it would almost be like saying, it's hard for us to fully understand because idol worship looks like such a foreign concept to us today. It's very difficult, and I put myself in that as well. That it really is difficult for me to understand. Oh, right. Here we go. Okay, Kalia is with us as well now. Okay. It's very difficult for us to really understand and appreciate. And idol worship looks to us like something that you would have to go out of your way, to do. That you would have to but it's not. It was the most not only most common cultural. It was the it was the norm. It'd be like saying, I'm not even sure what the equivalent would be. It would say like going to the movies, but it's not. It's even simpler than that. It's the most basic, aspect of communal life in the world at the time. Everyone is worshiping idol. It's not as if it's not like we think, oh, it's like going to church. So okay, if I weren't going to synagogue, then I would never go to church. No, it would be like going to the store. Meaning it is not something which is extra to the way people lived their lives. Every human being in the world at the time, and every human being that encountered, meaning idol worship was one of the most fundamental, we say idol worship, religious life, culture, meaning the culture of all nations was whatever their idol worship was. That was the culture. That's if you went to someone's shop, everything was filled with idol worship. The way the terms that they used to speak was filled with idol worship. It was not some kind of like strange, eccentric type of behavior that someone would say, you know what, that looks really, I'm going to go research and think which idol worship I'm interested in. And your everyday back and forth with your neighbors or doing business, idol worship was everything. That was culture. It's not as if they had other things to occupy themselves with. They weren't watching movies. They weren't reading books. I'm not talking about just the Jews. All human beings. Idol worship was the foundation of their culture, not as some external thing. It was the essence of their culture. So it's not a foreign concept to think that they would be influenced by this. Or
clearly during the 40 years wandering, they didn't have one idol. I'm sure that, other than the golden calf. So their culture was Hashem spoke to them, took us out of Egypt. They lived for 40 years. That wasn't their culture. Other people may have had that. But it's almost like saying we forgot about the Holocaust, like for Jews. Even though we didn't live through it, how could we not be aware that the Holocaust took place as a Jew? I mean, I understand people deny it, but we don't. And how could they deny that they lived for 40 years without idol worshiping? Sure, people around them idol worship. There's people around us deny the Holocaust. We wouldn't deny the Holocaust. I don't get, you're rationalizing something that seems that they spent, it was a pretty big, significant issue. God took us out of Egypt, told us to not worship idols. We didn't worship idols, I'm sure, for 40 years, so that's almost whatever, and that's 2 generations without that. And all of a sudden they're back to idol worshiping.
So,
Doesn't
so
compute.
I'm not saying that their culture was a culture of idol worship. I'm saying that any interaction they had with other nations, including, as the book of Judges tells us at the beginning, including the nations that they left living among them, any interaction with them included exposure to idol worship, and not idol worship as a religious practice. It was the it was the ABC of the culture. Meaning, it would be like saying, if a person, you went into someone's house and there was a cross, but instead of there being a cross on their there and on their wall, there were idols, and that when they're sitting down to eat, they thank the idol, right? It's not like here. Let me give you a theological argument, as a Midianite or as a Canaanite, and we give you a theological explanation. We'll get into debate, and I'll convince you. It was the ABC of the culture. I mean, we're talking about idol worship as if it's a religious practice. It was also religious practice, but it was just the foundation of culture, was one that included these aspects, these aspects that we today call them idol worship. Now, in addition to that, even if I would accept your example of the Holocaust, can you compare the attitude that people in today's younger generation have towards Germans or towards the Holocaust as people who lived through it? The first 20 years after the Holocaust, no one bought anything German. No one bought German cars. No one bought German electronics. No one bought German anything. And a Jew wouldn't go live in Germany. Jews wouldn't go visit Germany. Jews would not fly through Germany. Not because they're afraid of being killed, because the memory was so fresh, it was so real to them. Today, in today's generation, if you were to come and say, we're going to ostracize German products, that'd be considered bigoted. You won't hear people speak like that today. You won't hear Jews speak like that today. You won't, today, many Jews say, want to go on vacation to Germany. Why not? Beautiful, beautiful modern city, Berlin. It's supposed to be beautiful. Can you imagine in the 1950s? No, that would be so even the example that you bring, which is not an everyday practice, even that is something that 70 years later becomes, it weakens and weakens and weakens. But idol worship is much more significant because it's an everyday thing, which is just part of the natural surrounding around them. Anytime you have any business interaction with anyone who's not Jewish, if you're selling goods, it's just constantly there, and it's culture. We call it idol worship. It was the culture around them, and we are all influenced by the culture around us, and they were influenced by the culture around them. I'm not justifying. I'm not saying that it's okay that they worshipped idols. Of course not. I'm saying it makes perfect sense that they would very slowly when you say they, one person gets influenced a little bit, and then one other person gets influenced a little bit, and then one family that one of their children does business with someone or whatever and brings back a gift that he got, not even knowing what it is, and then suddenly and then at some point there's a critical mass. But historical memory is, and again, you're talking about here a generation and a half goes by between each cycle. And even during the time of the desert, at this point, we're 250 years. By the time we come to Gideon, okay, we're talking close to 200 years since the sin of the golden calf. That's a long time ago. There are no movies, there are no pictures, there are no books. Do they know that the sin of the golden calf took place? They do. We know for a fact that they do because that story is told to them in the text by the prophets, by different prophets as they go along. So it is by certain sins that we're reminded of by the prophets of each generation. So yes, I believe that, Ron, that chances are they knew of that event. But how many people actually died as a result of that sin? 3,000 people. That's it. Only 3,000 people died as a direct consequence of the sin of the golden calf. So you're talking about 200 years after the event. And during those 200 years, chances are that the severity of that event has been diminished in the way they tell it. And to begin with, it was probably told as, okay, yeah, it was really bad, and Moshe was really angry, and there were these tablets that were destroyed, and the fragments of those first tablets are still in the tabernacle in that city that we go to, or that tent that we go to 3 times a year. But only 3,000 people died. And this, whatever. I sit down with a meal with someone, and he gives me a gift, so I take it and I put it up in my house. And it's just a phrase that we say, thank the gods. It's just a phrase. It's not. And a year goes by, another year, and cultural influences are not like we read them in the verse as, they worshipped idols, as if there was a moment where they weren't worshiping idols, and a day later suddenly they were. These are long cultural sociological processes. But I do agree with you. There is, after the cycle is going to take place over and over and over, at some point, the nation as a nation will start getting it. Or when a certain prophet will come along, or when a king comes along and says, okay, this is what we need to do, it suddenly will make sense to them because, something has been ingrained into our collective memory over generation after generation after generation. But you don't change a culture within one historical event. It takes a very, very long time for a culture, for a nation, for a culture, let alone a nation, which is, a nation is not just a bunch of individuals. It's a historical collective which is constantly changing and growing, and all these different influences that have to do with going from being slaves to being nomads to being landowners to being responsible for your own safety and economy. There's all these things happening together, and that's why this whole period of the judges is this semi-chaotic time where all these different things are going on, and they're experiencing what it's like to be influenced. And think about it. In Egypt, they weren't influenced by Egypt. They were enslaved by Egypt. Okay? They did not have so much of the choice to define their own culture. And then in the desert, they also didn't really have that much of a choice because there was nothing else. There was just the relationship with God. It doesn't mean they always followed his commandments or did what they were supposed to do. But as far as they didn't have any other influences, and suddenly now they're in the land, they have the opportunity to create themselves as a nation, or the beginnings of a nation, and at least in the tribal, at least initially as in the smaller structures of a tribe, and they're kind of feeling out what that means, and that also means learning what it means to have other nations and other cultures, and not have an immediate response of everyone dying, and not, or being swallowed by an earthquake like they were in the desert. Rather, having the chance to grow, to experience, and to make mistakes, and to suffer for it, but to learn gradually in order for hopefully to develop their own, their own identity and their own strength, and not for it to be coerced like it was by the Egyptians, or coerced like it was in the desert. The desert was also a coercion by the fact that there was no other option, and there were immediate responses to every time they failed. And over here, they're being expected to mature. The process of maturity requires the ability to fail and to experience the consequences of that failure. But we'll see. The cycles, it's not saying the same thing exactly. There's a message that's being transmitted to them through the changes in each one of the cycles. It's getting closer and closer for them to realize this is not a coincidence. It's getting closer and closer to you. And now there's an actual moral and theological message that's being told to them only with 300. And so, yeah. I think we're gonna, if there are any comments or questions, but I think we'll wait to delve into the next chapter for next week. I think we're almost to the hour point, and the next chapter is a is a long chapter. Just for the heck of it, just so we see a little bit. Wait, if there's any other comments or questions, anyone wanted to say anything? Okay, so just in order for us to at least see a little bit of the chapter, the first 3 verses of the chapter are actually, they kind of actually stand on their own, at least to some degree. So we just saw at the end of the 7th chapter that the tribe of Ephraim, Gidon called the tribe of Ephraim and said to them, cut off the Midianite force, right? To stop them from crossing over, and that way we'll catch them in the middle, right? And we saw that they captured the two generals of, they captured and killed and decapitated the 2 generals of the army. Okay, then we're going to look just at the first 3 verses of chapter 8. And the men of Ephraim said to him, meaning to Gidon, right? They brought to Gidon the 2 decapitated heads of the generals of Midian. And the men of Ephraim said to him, why did you do that to us, not calling us when you went to fight the Midianites? And they rebuked him severely. Actually, in Hebrew, it's vayerivun. In Hebrew, it would be translated, and they fought with him severely. They battled. It would say they fought with him severely. So they're coming and they're challenging him. Now we know the answer. The answer is because God said only 300 men, right? And he did call, because 300 men. There's a reason for this, because only the people who were worthy were called initially, and then everyone else was called in. But they were very upset, obviously, and it's very interesting how he answers them. But he answered them, after all, what have I accomplished compared to you? Why, Ephraim's gleanings are better than Abiezer's vintage. They are from the tribe of Ephraim, and he is from the tribe. Abiezer is his father, okay, or that's the name of his family, and that is the one of the lower families of the tribe of Menashe. Okay, so he's saying, look, I'm from the lowest. And he also said this to the angel. When the angel said to him, you're going to be a leader, he said, who am I? He said he was very similar to Moshe in the way he was speaking, and was very similar to other Jewish important leaders. Anyhow, so he says, listen, he's saying to them, what your achievement is a great achievement. My achievement is nothing. What am I? I didn't do anything. I've come from this lowly family, and you got the generals, right? He says, what have I accomplished compared to you? You got the generals. Why Ephraim's gleanings are better than Abiezer's vintage, right? You guys, what you were able to scoop in at the end and take, the gleanings that you got are much, much better than Abiezer's vintage and what I took at the beginning, right? So he's basically trying to appease them by saying, look, what you guys did, although you came in at the end, and you got the prize. You got the generals, right? God has delivered the Midianite generals, Orev and Zev, into your hands. And what was I able to do compared to you? And when he spoke in this fashion, their anger against him abated. So we see here, we will discuss this next week in much greater length, because we'll see how things develop later in the chapter. But this is just one more example. We saw this last chapter when we learned last time that Gidon really comes out looking, we see several examples of him being really a very impressive leader. He really does, and more so than any of the previous judges, we see the development of a leader here, not just someone who's meant to just lead a victory and that's it. But he's actually, we saw he destroyed the he destroyed the altar of the idol worship in his town, and he got into a whole battle with the people in his town, where he was saying, this is not just what I'm about to do is not just to beat off, to win, to remove the oppressor. I'm going to lead us all in a much deeper change. The first thing, before we can have a military victory, we need to get rid of, at least symbolically, we need to get rid of the idol worship amongst us. We did not see that with Othniel. We did not see that with Ehud ben Gera. We did not see that even with Devorah, who was a prophetess, who was a prophet. This is the first one who's actually taking upon himself to lead the Jewish people, not just in a military victory, but saying there's a moral / religious change that needs to take place parallel. And that's also why, right? That's why Hashem, it's the perfect timing for this kind of taking this step up in the process, in the historical message, in the message of the Jewish people. No, not 20,000 soldiers, not 10,000 soldiers, 300 soldiers. Because there's the children of Israel are ready to understand what's happening here, which is more than just military and economics. It's about morality / religious destiny and obligation. And therefore 300 people only, so the message will be clear. And then also when Gideon also suddenly finds himself in this political conundrum of tensions, he doesn't face off directly. He says, okay, listen, he comes and he compliments them. He said, listen, you did a good job. He appeases them, he quiets things down. This is just one more example of Gideon's, of his stature as a leader. And we'll see this develop further in the chapter. Now one could ask, well, shouldn't he have said something to them about, well, I didn't call you early on because you weren't worthy, or because God specifically wanted only the people, only 300? Maybe he should have. So did he miss out here on an opportunity of educating them further? And he was just trying to win a short-term political win by giving up on a deeper role he has as a leader, or was it the right thing to do in order to quiet down something that could have developed into a more serious situation? We'll see this later. We'll see this later on in the chapter. So, any comments, questions on that? I just wanted to make sure we learned at least a little bit of new material. Anything? Yeah. No? Okay. If not, then okay. And God willing, we will continue next week.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yom Haatzmaut Sameach. Oh, you know what? Thank you for mentioning that, Alex. I'll just quickly come and say that these aspects of Gideon that we're talking about, or the historical stages and the cycles, I think fits perfectly with Yom Haatzmaut, which we will be celebrating this week, and the concept of seeing military difficulties and being able to see through them or beneath them as manifestations of something deeper is, of course, fits very, very well with Yom Haatzmaut, the regaining sovereignty in the land of Israel, trying to build ourselves and facing all these types of adversities and oppressions or military difficulties that we've been facing for the last 70 years, and understanding that each time that there's a cycle, and that's what we've been living with, practically once every 10 years, there's some big either war or campaign, and we hear about the cycles with Gaza. We hear constantly about the cycles, another cycle with Gaza. This is a good example of, Ron, of what you were mentioning, that I think in hundreds of years from now, people will look back and say, what, they didn't understand? They didn't see? I don't think it's necessarily about idol worship right now. I think it might be about other things. I'm not sure what it is. I can take a guess, but when you're living through the cycles, it's a lot more difficult to identify what the root problems are. I have no doubt that they are of a moral and spiritual nature, but I don't know to put my finger on them. But when you're living through the cycles, we focus on, oh, they fired this amount of rockets, and we argue about BDS and not BDS. It's about economics, it's about land, it's about this, it's about that, and we look at the cycles and we think, oh, and hundreds of years from now they're going to look back and saying, what, they didn't understand, it wasn't clear to them based on some previous message. So I think that's part of our challenge, to try to remember that at the basis of all of the challenges that the state of Israel has had over the last 72 or 73 years, that we should constantly be asking ourselves and thinking, what are the moral and spiritual underpinnings of what we are supposed to be doing? What are the moral and religious and things that we are lacking? And because of them, we find ourselves in another cycle. And a religious historian might be able to, or historian who's coming from a theological perspective, might be able to come and identify and point out how the cycle of the War of Independence was a certain thing. And then we come to the next stage of the Six-Day War. So the War of Independence, only a certain amount of the land was liberated, and only a certain portion of the people were in the land of Israel. And in the Six-Day War already, we've gone to the next step. I can come up with theories about it, but I think it's a very, very good message to leave off with, that the concept of cycles of military and economic difficulties as a impetus to searching and finding a deeper reasons and remembering our moral and religious obligations that have to do with our destiny. That is a message which I think is very, very fitting for Yom Haatzmaut. And may we be able to identify the root causes of our cycles already now in our time, and not wait, not have to wait for more cycles and more cycles to finally get the message. And with that, I wish us all a Chag Haatzmaut Sameach, and God willing, we will see each other in a week from today.
Chag Sameach.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
What?